Welcome to Investing by the Books, a podcast by Redeye. I'm your host, Niklas Sävås, and with me in the studio is my friend, Eddie Palmgren. How are you today?
I feel really good. I can sense that I'm developing a lot mentally right now, and it's coming from all the conversations with you outside of the studio and also all the guests we have here on the podcast and everything that I'm reading, which is very, very inspirational. And it has also led to us making this commitment not to look at stock prices while the market is open, which has really put more focus on what really matters, and it makes me more calm as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, sometimes such a small commitment can mean such a big life change, to be honest. I mean, just to stay calm in the midst of a market that is crazy sometimes.
Yeah, hopefully you make better decisions.
Yeah, hopefully.
So how are you?
Yeah, I'm good and excited to speak with our guest, Eric Jorgenson, a fellow podcast host, product strategist and author. Today we're going to talk about his book, The Almanack of Naval Ravikant, published in September 2020 with a foreword by Tim Ferriss. What is the book about?
Yeah, the subtitle is A Guide to Wealth and Happiness, and to me that really sums up the book extremely well. I think the combination of wealth and happiness is somewhat unusual, and the one title I can think about is Richer, Wiser, Happier by William Green, who we talked with in episode 4.
And the book is based on wisdom from Naval Ravikant. Who is he?
Naval grew up under poor conditions in India in the 1970s and has become an icon in Silicon Valley and the startup culture around the world. He has founded several tech companies, maybe most known for AngelList in 2010. And he is also an angel investor himself. He participated in Twitter and Uber. And besides being a world-class business operator and investor, Naval is also followed by millions of people around the world for his advice on building wealth and living happily, which he generously shares on his social media and podcast and now also in this book. What is Eric Jorgenson's role in this?
So Eric Jorgenson has done a marvelous job threading together Naval's wisdom from interviews, tweets and podcasts into a book that reads like an intimate one-to-one conversation. We think the book has a really high value and that everyone should read it at least once. Worth mentioning is that they have created the book as a public service, so it's actually available for free in PDF and e-reader versions on navalmanack.com.
That is indeed incredible, and we are excited to have the author of this timeless book on the show. Here comes our conversation with Eric Jorgenson. Hi, Eric, and welcome to Investing by the Books podcast.
Hey, Eddie. Thanks for having me.
Where are you today?
I'm in Kansas City, nursing a cup of coffee and getting up early to talk to you guys. I'm excited about this.
Perfect. We're very thankful for that. And being a podcast from Sweden, having heard you say that sauna is a sort of meditation for you and knowing your name sounds very Nordic, we have to start by asking you, what is your heritage?
I think I'm, at least half pretty deep Nordic roots. I'm very tall. It turns out that I'm good at rowing and swimming, and I love a sauna. So I think those are all just like in my genes. I've got my family's at least a few generations in America, so I don't know too much about those roots, but undeniably they are there, to the point where like my nickname among my work friends is Eric the Viking, which was quickly just shortened to Viking. So I just like go by Viking in the office.
Perfect. We feel the connection here. So can you tell our listeners a bit more about what you have done in life so far?
I was very lucky to have kind of grown up in a small business household. Like my grandfather started a business that my dad ended up running. And so the dinner table conversation was kind of just like, making payroll and worried about customers and stuff like that. So I grew up thinking that like an entrepreneur was just a normal job. So I was selling candy out of my locker and getting paid to give kids rides to school and starting blogs and stuff in college, which is when Facebook kind of became big. And that was when I was like, oh, not just entrepreneurship, but like tech entrepreneurship. I ended up just like leaving school after 4 years, which felt both weird and normal. So I kind of like dropped out and eventually got a degree, moved to San Francisco to join this startup, which was kind of a wild, like 10-year ride that we just sold last year. And I did a ton of different jobs there, but lived in San Francisco for a while and traveled all over and met a bunch of interesting tech people and learned that whole world. And for the last year, I've kind of been on like a learning / side project sabbatical, where I've just been writing more and podcasting and working on my second book and doing more investing and just kind of catching up on all the stuff that like I wanted to do to suit my ADD that I didn't get a chance to for the last couple years while I was, working hard.
And the part of investing in companies, where did that come from and where did it start?
Oh, well, I mean, also the family background piece was very like, John Bogle, Vanguard. I read a lot of Morgan Housel. I'm like all in on, slow and steady, value, read a ton of Buffett and Munger. I don't have like the temperament to be a super good, like value investor. Like my pants just aren't pleated that way, but I have made a few quite good so far, angel investments just by kind of being in the like tech ecosystem. And so I'm kind of a weird mix of like value mindset, indexing for like most of my personal stuff. But like for work, we've done a bunch of angel investments, and I'm actually starting a small venture fund with some friends to scale that up a little bit. And so it's kind of a bizarre mix, like of ideologies, to be honest, but it is working and suits me and my sort of unique idiosyncrasies, I guess.
Well diversified.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you think about it as a like a barbell strategy?
Yeah, a little bit. I think I'm too like steeped in the value kind of like don't lose money thing to go all in on tech. And I have some friends who literally are like 95% of their net worth in crypto in a few tokens with leverage. And while I admire that and respect it and deeply love to watch the chaos of that unfold, that is not my temperament. Like I could never do that. I have too much respect for the hard work that went into building the pile in the first place. And so I definitely have a different mindset where it comes to like protect, nurse, compound, and a different mindset where it comes to like, all right, let's take some like big swings over here that are like very high multiple, all or nothing power law returns. And I think there's a role for both of those, especially, and maybe not for everybody, but especially for like someone who has, a decade plus in tech and connections to those kind of opportunities and things like that. If you're outside that world, it's kind of hard to conceive, or you're more likely to just not hit those power law returns, which really, really matters, turns out. So don't take big swings if you don't think you have a chance for those really big returns. But having seen, it took me a while to sort of trust the information feed and the network and to see that play out a few times before I'm actually like, okay, actually like chips on the table in this now.
Really interesting. In the intro, we have tried to explain who Naval Ravikant is, and tell us about how Naval crossed your path the first time.
The first time, it was pretty interesting. I had just won a hackathon, like a weekend-long hackathon, and I was meeting this person named Bo Fishback, who I became like good friends with eventually. But I was like 19 years old and didn't know anything about the whole world. And I was like trying to start this company, and he gave me a few pieces of advice and information to go look at. And one of the things was like, go read everything Paul Graham has ever written and go read everything on Venture Hacks, which was the blog that Nivi and Naval were writing at the time. And this was like, I don't know, circa 2010 maybe. And so I did. That was like my first introduction to Naval. And it was really sort of a like, hey, this person is writing about all the stuff that you need to know as a founder. And that was actually kind of that was very early in Naval's career too. I mean, he had not had a lot of big breakout hits at that point. He was like selling $10 PDFs, of like, founder advice for fundraising. I don't think he had not yet invested in Uber. Maybe he had in Twitter, but everyone in San Francisco in 2008 invested in Twitter. So it was a very like, it was not obvious that I would spend the next 10 years following this person, but like I just kept learning and following him and going to some talks and really watched as what he talked about evolved from, hey, here's the game theory of venture capital through, hey, here's how I'm building my company to, hey, here's, this is the beginning of crypto into philosophy and into, happiness and all of the things that he kind of talks about now and that we cover in the book.
And on your website, ejorgenson.com, we can read about the books that you have most influenced you? For example, Poor Charlie's Almanack, Principles by Ray Dalio, 0 to 1, and Seeking Wisdom. So we're curious to hear like why you chose these books and how they have inspired you to compile the Almanack of Naval Ravikant.
Those books are influential to me for a number of reasons. Like Poor Charlie's Almanack was probably the most important book I ever read, as far as like I read it at the right time, and then I daisy chained a bunch of reading as a result of that. I kind of like, I should go read Benjamin Franklin. I'll go read Robert Cialdini. I'll go read. So I took a lot of sort of Munger's advice from that book. But that set of books are really, I read just kind of trying to learn. But as I looked back, I was trying to figure out like what happened. Like as I published the Naval Almanack, I was like, people kept asking me how this happened. And I was like, I don't really know. Let me like dig and figure it out. And I realized that like some of my favorite books I've ever read weren't written directly by the authors. Poor Charlie's Almanack is a compilation by Peter Kaufman of talks / biography and sidebars and all kinds of stuff. Seeking Wisdom is Peter Bevlin sort of pulling from all these different sources. All Peter Bevlin's books, which are all amazing, are all kind of compilations. My friend Max Olson wrote the Letters of Warren Buffett. Like those are all books that are built of raw materials that are not books, and they're not written in traditional narrative prose by the author. And I think having some of those installed in my head for years kind of showed me the path, or at least showed me that there was a path there. It's like, hey, you can write a book on behalf of somebody else. And I know that because I've seen it done for Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett like 10 times. And they make great books. So why not extend that to this situation where I was desperately wishing that I was reading Principles, and there's a piece where Ray Dalio is like, I wrote this book because I wished some of my heroes had written a book that told me how they thought about the world, and I would like to read a lot more of those. And I was like, yeah, shit, I wish Naval had written Principles. And sort of that wish for the final product combined with the fact that, I'd seen all of these great books arise as compilations. I was like, well, he does have a lot of raw material. Maybe there's something to kind of put together here. Like, I think we could do something great with it. I've certainly learned a lot from him. But all the value is locked up in Twitter and podcasts, which are certainly not super mainstream. They're both a little bit subcultures. They're a little bit unsearchable, and they're a little bit ephemeral. And books are an amazing technology that is incredibly widespread, and there's well-trodden paths. And so maybe there's a little transformation and value to be created by doing that.
And then you created this great book, the Almanack of Naval Ravikant, and it is divided into two parts, wealth and happiness. And the happiness part starts with a quote that the three big ones in life are wealth, health, and happiness. And we pursue them in that order, but their importance is reverse. So we're thinking that if happiness is the most important, how come you decided to start the book with wealth?
Yeah, so I went through a lot of drafts. So there was actually a version of this book that did start with happiness. And I went through a lot of sort of peer readers and reviewers. I would send the manuscript to people and then have conversations with them afterwards, which is, I give a lot of credit to that process in like how this got refined. And someone said like, yeah, I mean, like, I like this. This is kind of true and I get it, but it's really weird to like just get dropped into a conversation with someone and have them start dropping like these Zen Buddhist koans about like deep, like sort of abstract concepts of happiness and how I should be living my life. Like, it was kind of like, bro, I don't even know you. Like, we just met. Like, don't be telling me how to live my life and like what makes me happy or not. Which, if you think about it, is like, if you met someone in real life, it'd be a pretty weird start to the conversation. So it ended up, and it's really like, I do think they unfold. And I think, part of the reason for that quote is meaningful is like, we all know that like health is more important than wealth and happiness is more important than health. And like, we all intuit that, but we still all move through them in the same order. And so I think there is a logical progression to putting those things in that order, even if it's not the medicine that we should take. It is the medicine it is what we actually eat first. So putting it at the beginning makes sense.
Yeah, it's giving people the candy that they want first and then going from there.
Yeah, I see this trend, right? I did kind of a conversations and workshop after the book came out with people. And like, we had a wealth section and a happiness section. and like 100 people showed up to wealth, and like 40 showed up to happiness. And it may be because happiness is harder and more abstract and more personal. But it may be really because everyone just believes like they need to work harder on getting wealthy, and then when they're wealthy, they'll be happy, which is what the whole second part will tell you isn't true. But that's it is so hard to shake that belief. If it was just a book about happiness, I don't know what it'd be doing. Maybe it would be doing amazing and everybody would want to read about it. But the fact that their two are connected and it shows you how, and that the levers are all there, I actually think is a compelling and kind of unique piece, and hopefully instructive and useful for people.
Definitely. And I'm sure many of our listeners are interested in building wealth. So we'll get into the happiness part a bit later, but start off with the part about wealth, where Naval's tweet is how to get rich without getting lucky is a very good one. So we're wondering, what is the biggest misconception about wealth?
And Naval would probably say, and I think he addresses it in that first tweet storm, that like it is not necessarily about hard work. Especially in this sort of age of increasing leverage, like you can get incredibly wealthy with one or two really good decisions. And, there's a lot good to be said about hard work, but it is not sufficient to say like, if you work hard, you'll be wealthy. You really have to spend a lot more time thinking and looking and examining sort of the nature of the universe in a little bit of a three-body problem way to understand what the high leverage actions are to achieve your outcome, I think. So probably the biggest misconception is the correlation of hard work to wealth creation.
Yeah, I think it's also important to understand the concept of money is just the currency between wealth and time, as you very well illustrate in the book.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other one in there, maybe like it's a subtle nuance actually, but I think he does a good job of saying like there's a difference between money and wealth, and like when you trade your time for money, you aren't creating wealth. Wealth is having assets that earn while you sleep, and sort of compounding and growing those is a very, very different game from, just making your number go up and going directly into savings, right? Those are extremely different games, and changing your mindset to realize the game that you're playing and figure out sort of the nature of it is an incredibly important first step. I think the other misconception actually, I think, or maybe like missed concept is the one about if you secretly sort of despise wealth, it will elude you. Like there's sort of a meme going around of like, oh, billionaires are evil, they're extracting value. This is sort of like bizarre anti-capitalist movement after everything that we've seen the last 100 years and all of the reduction in poverty that we've seen. It is a very strange sort of cultural swing that for a bunch of people that I think just don't really understand sort of the benefits of capitalism and the nature of it, and don't have a better suggestion. They're just sort of railing against whatever exists currently. But there's a bunch of people who I think have either intentionally or sort of like through the air taken in this concept that, to have wealth means that you have done something wrong or wronged someone else or taken more than your share. I think that's one, fundamentally wrong, but I think two, having any of that belief inside you will create this sort of self-limiting behavior where if you think your goal is to become wealthy, but you also hold those values, it'll be extremely difficult. And you'll have this like weird underlying subconscious conflict that'll be difficult to resolve and get you feeling stuck. So I don't know if that's a misconception, but it is, I think, an important piece of the puzzle. And I'm glad Naval sort of dropped that in there, because I think that's probably a lot of people's sticking point that's just buried deep enough that they have no idea.
And do you think there's a difference between becoming rich and being wealthy?
We should define those terms if we're going to have a deep debate about it. I don't know. Rich just feels like a slightly gaudier word to me in this context, but I'm not sure who shares that perception.
And I mean, I really like the fact that Naval speaks a lot about what not to do. In many books you read about what to do to be successful, and maybe sometimes it's more important what to avoid. What does Naval say is necessary to avoid in order to be able to reach wealth?
If you're looking at it, you might have the more complete list than me. I know avoiding sort of short-termism in all its forms, like getting wealthy, I think by almost any means, is a long-term game. And you have to think over long time horizons in order to accomplish that. You have to understand the power of compounding. Certainly avoiding all sort of risk of ruin. Don't put your whole bankroll on anything. Stay out of jail. Maintain your morals sort of at all costs, because that ultimately becomes your. I think he's got an interesting story in there about Warren Buffett and how like his reputation alone and the our shared sort of awareness and trust in his morality is worth just billions and billions and billions of dollars. Like, who else can get the call to like bail out the U.S. economy, and whose mere association with sort of a bank is like, oh, that okay. Well, if Warren Buffett bought some stock, like the bank is saved. Like that is an incredible asset that is maybe less about what he did and more about what he didn't do. Like that is what 80 years of absolutely pristine moral record looks like, which is a really, really incredible thing.
So if we do avoid the biggest traps, which are the most important decisions and actions to improve our odds of building wealth?
I think the funny part is like it's very difficult to predict in advance, right? I think Naval said like 99% of effort is wasted. You just don't know which of those 1% of actions is going to turn out to be incredibly important. That's probably even more true with angel investing and in the tech world than some of these value things. But Buffett and Munger have said like, you remove 2 or 3 of the stocks from our long-term track record, Coke and Geico and C's, and it's like we have a very average track record minus our 3 or 4 best, and they don't even have a lot of punches in the card. So it is, I think, true in every domain. On the indexing side, like I have sat friends down and spent 2 hours setting up a Vanguard account and an auto withdrawal and been like, please forget this is here, and then call me in 50 years and tell me, thank God, these were the 2 most important hours you ever spent in your whole life. So like, these sort of simple, small actions can be incredibly impactful. And it just takes a little bit of perspective on knowing even what the range of those actions could be. And then sort of the discipline to get rid of the short term, like seemingly important stuff and look at those really high leverage actions. The things that they have in common are probably that they are either really long term, that they have sort of this uncapped outcome, or that they are moves backed by leverage, right? So installing a new tool, giving capital to someone else, like the things that don't involve like this ongoing sort of cost, are probably the most likely to fall into that camp.
It's interesting how this, I mean, both me and Eddie are active investors, but it's interesting how much, and when you think about it, how much time it takes from everything else you want to achieve in life. But just making the decision once, you're going to save through an index fund, and that's it. It's quite compelling. I think if you're not interested in investing, then it's probably the best advice you can give.
Or if you're interested in it but not that good at it, it takes a few years to figure that out, probably.
But also I think about innovation, and Naval says that scale what society wants but doesn't know how to get, and that is a way to getting to the wealth. But this to me implies that the society always wants new things, and that you have to innovate. But we also know that some people say that we should look out for what doesn't change, and people have been drinking Coke for the last 100 of years or so. So what are your thoughts on that?
This is one of those like almost not quite paradox, but like something, there is always something changing. And I love contemplating this sort of mind-bogglingly vast economy and thinking about the frontiers of humanity really in sort of all their forms, which I think like is a combination of art and science and entrepreneurship, right? Like those are the sort of interactions with the unknown where things are like constantly getting pushed out. I think, there's people who place bets on different things. And, some people bet on things changing, right? Like, Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist, is kind of like, I'm betting against Buffett on everything. I'm betting on things that change, and Buffett is betting on things that don't. I think there will always be things that are changing. There will always be things that don't change. Yes, people have been drinking Coke for the last 100 years, but there's not cocaine in it anymore. And actually, like, now Diet Coke is way more popular than regular Coke. So, like, it's not like that hasn't changed. And it's not like Coke's strategy hasn't, oh my God, we have to become global. Oh my God, we have to, pivot to fountains. Oh my God, like, the centralized media like enabled Coke in some ways that it could do, sort of national advertising and broadcast advertising. And I think a reasonable question is like, could Coke get created today without like brand advertising being as sort of like unifying and powerful? Like, I don't know. But is the structure of media changing enough to destroy Coke? Like, I also don't know. But a lot more things are getting sort of, I don't know if not compartmentalized is the wrong word, but sort of customized. Like we are becoming, there will be more and more products for smaller and smaller groups of people. We don't all eat like Prego sauce the same way. Now there's like 95,000 toothpaste options and like spaghetti sauce options. And like maybe that will happen to Coke at some point. Like, I already kind of mix those things up. In the paradox of like things that change and things that don't, I actually think Jeff Bezos is probably like the most interesting middle of that Venn diagram. He's looking at the things that will never change in customer demand, right? They'll always want lower prices. They'll always want more selection. And he's using technology, which is ever changing, to satiate those sort of persistent demands. So it's not hard to look out 10 years and predict what will be in demand. Then look around and say, like, what are the tools available to me to serve that? I think that's a really interesting piece. I'm enough of a technologist. Like, I would rather bet on new technologies changing and look for ways to bring in new technologies to change sort of the fundamental status of human nature, which, I'm incredibly glad now that the richest person in the world is a founder and an engineer and not a capital allocator. Like, I think that is just better for humanity. I think the more engineers we have, and the more scientists, and the faster technology is advancing and getting deployed and getting distributed and getting used, sort of the better off we are all going to be. I think capital allocation is a very important role in achieving that. But I don't think, I don't know that like our best and brightest becoming capital allocators in mass, and financializing new things is like in the benefit, to the benefit, or their highest and best use for the growth of the species. So I always lean a little bit more towards technology, and looking to improve things sort of in a new way, not just keep them the same.
I reread 0 to 1 quite recently, and I think that idea really gets hammered in that book. Do you agree? Or
yeah, that's a great book. I love 0 to 1. I think that's a good. Yeah, there's a Nivi has a blog post that's sort of a similar piece where it's like, the thing that defines a startup is delivering a new level of quality at a new level of scale. If you give up the desire to reach a new level of quality, then you're McDonald's. If you give up the desire to reach a new level of scale, then you're the Four Seasons. You just created like a new luxury product. But if you can push out the whole frontier of both quality and scale at the same time, you have benefited a massive number of people, including the consumer surplus. You've created and captured new value. And that is almost always impossible without new technology. There are versions of it that is business model innovations, or there's business versions of it that are, not technological in nature, but almost all of them come from some new technology. I think it is a safe bet over time to, especially as the pace of technology innovation is increasing, like that frontier is moving faster and it's expanding faster, to sort of keep looking at the set of problems that is never going to change and set of desires, and keep looking around for new technologies that are going to improve it. And as those technologies compound, like the total space of this keeps getting bigger. And so there's more and more and more opportunity every day. My favorite illustration of, like, it's one of those things that's easy to say, but difficult to conceptualize or believe, really. But I think there's this amazing proof point for it, actually, which is that, like, for basically the whole history of Google, every single day, 15% of searches are completely unique. Even as the search value has increased, even as like more of the world has come online, like 1 in 8 searches basically is brand new every day. And that is like almost you can't imagine a better data set to quantify like the rate of innovation and change and newness, and whether that's a new celebrity or a new song or a new company or a new technology or like any of the new language, like coming online, there's just always that frontier, and it's almost a fixed scale. It's not like it's the same number. It is, as the, balloon gets bigger, the total volume of the size of the frontier of the balloon also keeps getting bigger. So there is an ever expanding opportunity in that frontier, and just so many exciting opportunities in it, that I hope people still appreciate, and never feel that scarcity mindset of like, oh, the good ideas are gone or the technology has already been deployed. Like it is always growing.
It's interesting how much Google should have an information edge based on that.
Mm-hmm.
A concept that was quite interesting as well. We interviewed Gautam Baid on his fantastic book, The Joys of Compounding, and there he doesn't only writes about compounding money, but also about compounding that as a force that's important for everything in life, more or less. And I think that was really something that I thought about when reading the Almanack. And Naval says capital is just the beginning. So besides exponential growth of money, what other rewards are there for playing the long-term game?
I think the other big thing that he hits on in there is compounding trust and compounding wisdom, which is really, those are related things, but it's very difficult to replace the feeling of working with a small handful of people that you really know and really trust over a very long period of time, and the feeling of sort of working with and for each other on a team, and knowing that those people have your back and that you are sort of working in service of them as well. And to our point, to our sort of note about Warren Buffett and the reputation that he has at scale over time, you don't have to be Warren Buffett. Like having a sterling reputation with 5 to 10 people who you respect over the long course of your career, who would, at the drop of a hat and with no further questions asked, like do a deal with you or invest in you or have you invest in them. That could very easily become one of those few actions with massively outsized results. So I think, the compounding of trust over time is incredibly important, and reputation, wisdom. Also, like it's very difficult to learn so much on your own. It's a very big world. There's a lot going on. You can't be an expert in everything. So those kind of come together. And actually, Sam Hinkie is somebody I was lucky to meet, and I've loved his podcast appearances and some of his writing. And the whole tagline of his life is basically like compounding, love, trust, and capital, or trust, wisdom, and capital, I think, is like the tagline of his whole fund and how he's arranged his whole life. And I think that's just absolutely amazing. And, certainly some level of enlightenment. And I try to find my own version of that without copying it directly, because I think it's just so on the nose.
I come to think of the quote by Harvey Firestone that we read about in Poor Charlie's Almanack, that one has to get perspective, and one can get it from books or from people, but preferably from both. So really about acquiring knowledge and wisdom, and that's what we're trying to do in this podcast with you and our other guests. So something we have to talk about is also leverage, because I know that's a favorite part of you in the book, and we also are really interested in this topic. And Naval says that there are 3 broad types and that they have emerged one by one and they are all still around, but one is now superior. So can you tell us a bit about this evolution?
Yeah, I think leverage is there's kind of a whole chapter dedicated to it in the book, and people, it's probably the thing that I get the most follow-up questions on. People reach out and say like, "Hey, where else can I read or learn more about leverage? Is there a book on it or something else?" And I couldn't find anything. So I started really digging more and learning more and writing more about this. So I kind of felt like it was the biggest unanswered question left for me, at least after reading the book, was like, okay, like, but where is the expanded version of this mental model? How can I learn a ton more about it? How can I apply it? What are more examples? Show me case studies, show me frameworks, and that's all kind of, I've been sort of working on that for like the last year or so. So I've sort of learned a lot about that. It's really, it's a mental model that does not come super naturally to me, just sort of based on my like frugal Midwestern upbringing. Like we are very, we hold self-sufficiency as a value, like strongly, but leverage is really, and I should say like with people who are probably used to the financial definition of this, like this is not about specifically using debt to get a higher ROI, right? Like this is leverage as a mental model as comes from like the basic simple machine in physics, right? I can't lift 800 pounds, dead off the floor, but if you give me a 20-foot lever, I can lift 800 pounds, no problem. And so generalizing that slightly, there are, in my framework, at least tools, products, people, and capital that can all sort of augment your natural strength and abilities and judgment and help you achieve things like that 800-pound lift that you could not have achieved, without the support of that lever. Naval's, I sort of expanded Naval's like basic, sort of 3 frameworks. So into tools, products, people, and capital. Those are the 4 like buckets of leverage. If you guys want, I'm happy to like talk through examples of those. This is a rabbit hole I can go really far down, so I don't want to go too far undirected.
Please go ahead. That's very interesting.
Okay. So tools, I think, the example I like to use here is like a lumberjack standing in the forest. Like if you're a lumberjack with no tools, you're basically picking up sticks and you're not creating a lot of value. Your hourly rate is, I don't know, very low. Probably not quite subsistence farming your own wood. With an axe, all of a sudden you could fell, maybe a tree an hour. So all of a sudden you can drop a tree, start a fire, go do something else. If you have a chainsaw, you can drop 10 trees an hour, and all of a sudden you like actually might be a business who can sell some wood to others. With a tractor and another guy, now all of a sudden you're like a logging operation, right? So there's 4 different stages of leverage with different levels of tools. And actually in the last one, we brought in some people leverage, so someone to help. So in these 4 buckets, that's a tool illustration. For product, I think of that as a product of your mind, right? So writing down a standard operating procedure, encoding an algorithm, recording a podcast, like we are right now creating a product of ourselves that will go on and outlive us and serve hopefully thousands or tens of thousands of people in parallel well into the future on demand. These like thin digital clones of us that like we are not responsible for and that cost us nothing to maintain. They can just kind of run on. In the people category, there are all sorts of people around us who can augment our skills and our abilities, accountants, lawyers, helpers, anybody who's maintaining our sewer and water systems is providing some form of leverage at scale. Like we are all dependent on each other. But you can look around to employ, starting a new business. If you don't have all of the necessary skills or abilities or experience, you can find the right partner or bring them in. And capital, obviously, is sort of the medium of exchange for all the rest of those, right? And capital comes in many forms. It's not just like cash in the bank necessarily. But you can look around your capital assets like your home and turn that into, start Airbnb-ing it or rent out your car or whatever. So there's all kinds of capital assets you have. And what I find is inventorying those periodically is a very helpful sort of starting mechanism for starting to think in leverage. And actually now every quarter I sit down, I've got, my goals sort of over here or my concepts, and then I inventory the leverage that I have, and I look at what I'm using, what I'm not using, and I look at what's available to me and sort of what I need to do in service of accomplishing my goals. So I start with like, what do I want to achieve? And then work backwards into like what levers are available to me to accomplish that rather than the other way around.
Sounds like something every company should do.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can absolutely think of a company as a set of levers. And almost always people have a blind spot around one or two of those, that they're either uncomfortable with using, or they don't think of them as leverage, or they're afraid to get into it. And so, I have a course where I try to sort of impart some of these frameworks and lessons and just continue to kind of bake this into people's heads. And a lot of the conversations I have, people are like, I'm really, really good at, creating media, I create products all the time. I write, standard operating procedures. I have no problem hiring and managing people. I love that piece. But like, I spend no time upgrading my tools, and I have no patience for it. I hate it. And they just like, maybe they don't have a capital allocators mindset. And so they just hoard, any income and like keep it as cash. And they don't think about ways to redeploy that into hiring more people or adding new tools or scaling up their operation. And so they just forces this plateau at different levels. Conversely, somebody may be very much a capital allocator, but is not comfortable managing people, or scared to take that leap, or doesn't know how, or just isn't sort of suited by personality to do that. And sort of, even adding one person who is comfortable with that all of a sudden unlocks that as an opportunity. And when you have all four of those sort of feeding each other and compounding, you can really build, I like to think of my work now as basically just building this mountain of levers. And so I'm standing in this place, and my work is to like extend the levers around me and add new levers. And now like I can reach out and push on this and like invest a bunch of capital in a tech company, or create a new podcast with a new person, or reach out and meet somebody new that I wouldn't have had before. And this work of sort of creating effort and compounding these things, your mountain grows and your influence grows, and your ability to create an impact grows over time. And everyone who, and others are getting leverage from me at the same time too, right? Like it's a very, we are all someone else's leverage, and it's a very like sort of mutually beneficial thing. It's just learning to use the resources around you.
How do you prioritize that? It's going to be really hard when you have so many options, and it's all the alternative cost, I guess.
Yeah, it is. Focus is a challenge for me sometimes, and prioritization. It changes. I'm going through probably a life stage change where I'm changing a little bit from like sort of frantic accumulation. Brent Beshore calls this like the knife fight, into like trying to be starting with like lifestyle a little more. And like, what do I want to do? Like I used to have 3 options, and I had to pursue all of them as aggressively as possible. Now I have 100 options, and I need to get better at filtering them and looking for the best 3. But if I do 10, I will wreck my own life through my own decisions, by like trying to pursue too much. And so just getting the hang of sort of like filtering those frameworks, getting better at saying no, which I'm still not particularly good at. But yeah, there's a lot of new skills that sort of come up, and you're like, why does my life suck right now? It's like, oh, there's a new skill that is required in this like life level that I have not even begun. I didn't know was available, or I didn't know was a skill bar I needed to start filling up. And oh my God, I need to start learning that, because it's causing problems.
Yeah, it sounds to be, it must be a lot about judgment. And the second chapter of The Part on Wealth is about building judgment, which starts with Naval's quote that you don't get rich by spending your time to save money. You get rich by saving your time to make money. And when I read that, I thought about the Robinson Crusoe economy example, where you're on an island and you need to feed yourself, and you maybe say you pick some fruits and you live on that, and you pick more fruits, and then you get time to innovate, maybe, come up with a fish net to catch fish, or so on. And I think this example was quite similar, that, I mean, you have to start by saving, but when you've done that, you can start to think about how to innovate. Of course, you can, in this time, you can borrow money and start a business or so on. But I just think the examples are quite the same. What's your interpretation of that saying?
I think for probably most people listening to this podcast, that is more true than false, right? Like Naval's encouragement is to, like, I think stop looking down at your expenses and trying to optimize what's there, and start understand that, like, you will need time in order to create wealth, in order to learn, in order to make different decisions, in order to evaluate opportunities or start new businesses, create something with this opportunity to have this uncapped return. And it's really hard to do that if you're working, if you're working 18 hours a day, or if you're working 6 hours a day, but then you spend 12, like, washing Ziploc bags and planting your own garden and minimizing your costs to the bare bone. I will say, like, I think there's a million ways to make $1 million. The people in the sort of financial independence, early retirement, like, movement are interesting examples of, like, I hate my job, but I'm only going to hate it for 10 years because I'm going to save every single penny. And, like, that is how I'm going to optimize my life. I think that's pretty interesting. I think, whatever, we're on an investing podcast. So, like, I think everybody here is pretty much going big, which is great. It's just it is probably even more true for us than for anybody else. This Naval quote, which I imagine is why people are attracted to it. I do think, I wrote a post about this recently. Like, different sort of every few orders of magnitude of net worth, you have to, like, totally change your strategy of thinking and planning. And so I think, like, the first few sort of orders of magnitude, I think probably up to maybe $100,000, like, literally just don't even think about investing. Just invest all your energy in saving your money. And then the next is kind of like, yeah, investing matters, but even if you optimize, even if you have amazing, like, returns on paper, like, it's not going to have a huge impact on your life, because the earning potential of your time still so massively outweighs the earning potential of your capital. But both are important, because you have a savings account that's going to suck. Like, put it somewhere that it's actually earning. But you see this sort of switch flip where, like, at some point your capital can out earn your time, and that is a very important switch. And then your strategy just becomes almost entirely, like, capital allocation and return optimization. And your time, like, almost doesn't matter anymore, which I think is, for people who don't know that switch is out there, like, that's what Naval is calling out in this. Realize how much harder your money can work than you can, and how much more efficiently that scales than your own time. Back to our first point about, like, it's not about hard work, really. It very much is about hard work to get off the ground. As Charlie Munger says, like, that first 100,000 is a bitch, but you got to do it. And by now it's probably the first million. Because I don't know if he said that in 1930, but that's probably when he was going through it.
Yeah, the question is, where do you set your limit? How much means do you need to live on?
Yeah, which is a very personal question, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I love the Naval quote that people who live far below their means enjoy a freedom that people busy upgrading their lifestyles can't fathom.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the favors he does it for us is kind of draw this clear relationship between, like, our level of desires, our desire for our lifestyle, and the work that we have to put in. There's a lot of ways to get your desires below your lifestyle. One is to become a monk and work really, really hard on getting rid of your all of your desires, and you don't need anything, and that's wonderful. The other is to, like, work pretty hard on, like, getting pretty rich and, like, having more than you want. But you need to work on creating a gap between what you have and what you want. And, like, you always need to want less than you have, and then you'll be happy. It's much easier said than done, but, like, that exists on a scale of monk to Bezos. And, like, you can pick your point on there. But if at any point you're spending more time wanting than you are having, then your subjective experience is going to be miserable, no matter where you are on the actual sort of set of assets owned by humans, which is a very interesting and I think helpful sort of line to draw. I think a lot of us probably spend a lot of time looking at the next, portfolio balance or completely arbitrary round number of portfolio assets, and like, I'll have a cigar when I get there, and then I'll be present, then I'll get fit, then I'll go climb Kilimanjaro or whatever. Then there's no reason to be putting most of that stuff off in practice for most people.
So I think that we should stop eating candy and go into the happiness part, go into Zen mode a bit. So
so I probably fed you some vegetables accidentally on that one, didn't I? I'm getting ahead of myself.
It was a good mix. But maybe we can start with how is, I think you touched it before, but how is happiness connected to wealth?
I don't know that they have to be, but I think for almost everybody they are. Naval has a very succinct version of this that I hope I quote correctly, but desire is a contract you make to be unhappy until you get what you want. And realizing that your own desires are at the root of all of your unhappiness is really an extremely powerful and, I would say personally, annoying revelation, right? It is very difficult. It's a difficult pill to swallow. But it is a very helpful thing to know and to see happen in your own life. And that doesn't have to be about wealth. If you're going through some health crisis, and you spend all of your time wishing and desiring that you weren't going through that health crisis, you're going to have a very miserable experience going through that. And so, desire far eclipses wealth. I think we just spend so much more time, thinking about wealth, basically because we're lucky enough to be pretty damn high up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that we think in terms of wealth instead of safety, or, some other need that we might have. But yeah, I think desire and happiness are much more correlated than wealth and happiness. We're just lucky to kind of desire equals wealth eight times out of 10 for probably most of us in the modern world.
I come to think of the concept in Japan, ikigai, that the reason for being. It's really the intersection of what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs, and what you love. Then you combine all of those.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually thought I expected Naval's he kind of dismisses purpose as like a driver of happiness in there, which I think is interesting. But he also says we all have to create our own meanings, and you can create your own meaning, and if you can do that successfully, then it's a very empowering. I think it's a very empowering message. The whole probably the subtext of the whole happiness section is like, look, this is all subjective. Like, you are in control of that voice in your head. Most people don't realize that. Most people don't spend any time attempting to control it, but that voice in your head really determines most of your lived experience. And let's remember that it's malleable. It's hard work to change it, but it is changeable.
It's really clear that humans are hardwired with all these instincts and desires to survive and reproduce and not to be happy. So what can we do to trick the system?
Are you asking me how to trick the system?
If you have any advice on that. I mean, Naval says that one can be very happy as long as one isn't too caught up in their own mind. So how can we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's all kinds of prescriptions that become very personal. I think finding the things that work for you is kind of a lifelong journey, and it's somewhat ever changing. There's a list of sort of the habits that Naval has cultivated that make him happier in there, which I think is interesting. Certainly everybody's going to have their own, but some of his off the top of my head are like, pausing when you feel the sun on your skin and like looking up and smiling. Another is like, very practically, like, just turn off your alarm clock. Like, don't allow other things to like force their way into your day. Practicing gratitude or creating space for meditation. He talks about a few different meditation practices he has in there. Non-judgmental awareness, like most of the voices in our head are just spending their time judging immediately, which I think, to your point, is a very evolutionarily learned thing. Like, we're constantly scanning our environment and like sort of reacting to it. but training that voice to have like a positive first interpretation instead of a negative, can be a huge difference maker. But it is a very, it's a discipline. It's a training. It is, he says a few times, like, happiness is a choice, which makes it feel trite and easy almost. And I think that it's not fair to say like, oh yeah, you just snap your fingers and you're happy. Like, there you go. And if you can't do it, you suck. Like, no, like not at it. Is in the same way that like, fitness is a choice, but it's actually like 1,000 choices or 1,000,000 choices. It's choosing over and over and over again to do the thing that is in your long-term best interest, that makes you fit or that makes you happy, that chooses a positive sort of interpretation of something, rather than following the path of least resistance, which is usually, I think the path of least resistance for the ego is usually some sort of blame or judgment. And the best path for you in the long run is actually some sort of appreciation or gratitude. And if we can all sort of learn to make that our first reaction, we'll be better for ourselves, first and foremost, but like also better for everyone around us.
Quite interesting to think about. On the health side, that when we talked about compounding before, I think it really comes together that it's the daily choices that is important. And Naval speaks about having his morning exercise, for example. And I just thought about that when you said that it feels like everybody says like, oh, now something happened to me. I got injured or I got sick. And often I think the answer is that, yeah, but you didn't do the right choices on a daily basis. So how is Naval prioritizing how to take care of himself?
Yeah, I thought this was actually a really counterintuitive and very important point. And I actually almost made this the first sentence of the book. He says, like, without my physical health, I cannot take care of my mental health, and I can't take care of my family, and I can't take care of my business, and I can't take care of everything that falls down from that. I was like, that's an incredibly important point. It's very true. Most of us spend a lot of time sacrificing our health in small ways every day to benefit these other things. And then the next component of that, which is what you asked about, is like, okay, how does he prioritize it? And I think, to your point, Eddie, the very first quote you brought up is like, we pursue them in reverse order, like happiness, health, and then wealth. He wakes up every day and works out first thing in the morning. Like, his calendar reflects his priorities. And he's like, I don't care what crisis is happening, in my house or in my businesses or, in the world. Like, I get up and I work out every day because that's my first priority, my physical fitness. And I think, the meditation sort of follows on from that. Like, that is his sort of regimen for mental health. And that sort of becomes the next priority. And so that is the next thing that gets time allocation in his day. And I know, so many people have their stated priorities or values. And then when you go through, and a lot of times you work with a performance coach or whatever, and they'll do a calendar audit. They're like, okay, well, you tell me these are your priorities, but your calendar is like, your priorities are A, B, and C, and your calendar is full of X, Y, Z. Like, what the hell is happening here, right? So it's very easy to not make those connections. And so, yeah, whatever, scheduling and orienting your life around what actually are priorities, and thinking about your priorities from a very first principles thing. What is the foundation of everything else that kind of comes next?
Yeah, and people often say, well, he's so rich and he has so much time and it's so easy for him, and I don't have time and I have to work all the time, and when should I get that into my schedule? But as you say, it's a priority.
One of the reasonable rebuttals that people have of the book is kind of like, yeah, but you're already rich. And so I think, like, to what extent, he was doing many of these things early on, and he says, like, I spent a lot of time unhappy and I spent a lot of time unhealthy. But he also says, like, I don't think those were necessary components to me becoming wealthy. Like, it's not like I had to do those things. He's like, I would have done the exact same stuff that I did. I just would have done it with more emotional stability, less anger, more health, more energy if I had invested in my health. Right. So I don't think we treat these as zero sum. Like, I have 10 hours and I can either put 10 like equally valuable hours into my wealth creation effort, or, I'm sacrificing 2 of those 10 units to go into health, which doesn't make me wealthy. And like what I found in a chapter of my life, when for the first time I was prioritizing my physical health over, and I was taking those 2 hours a day to like go to the gym, and that became my priority, and do healthy food prep. It was like, I was better at my job when I did that with 8 hours of effort, but they were high energy, sort of like thoughtful things. Like for the last 2 units, the worst 2 units of work that I gave up that day, like I gained back, 3 or 4 in energy and attention and vitality. So, feeling that for the first time, at least in my case, was really helpful to kind of break that, linear 1 unit of time, 0 sum sort of mindset.
And I also really like the practical example of Naval's mental fitness, that he just sits down on a chair, closes his eyes, and he sits there for 1 hour and let the thoughts come. And that's so simple, but I'm sure it's not that easy. And I really, it stayed with me. It's something that I would like to do, but I still haven't done it. So but coming from him, it's especially interesting because you can hear this from people who are like not super financially savvy, but he is, and he has this personal hourly rate of several thousands of dollars, and it really shows how valuable he thinks this is. So what do you think are the benefits of this meditation method?
Yeah, I have a hard time remembering exactly what is and isn't covered in the book, but I know I've heard him talk about this before. You basically get to this, like, you create space for these things to come up. And you almost, when you create space, the things that need to be processed, like, work their way to the top. And you find out that you're still carrying a grudge from, somebody for 10 years ago, or you're carrying judgment about this thing, or you're carrying a desire that you didn't know you had. And when you give them space, you kind of, you get this, issue that pops up, and then you can kind of think through it or process it or grieve it or forgive it or whatever it is, and allow it to sort of, pass over you, pass through you, let go, like, clear that item out. And, I think the other thing he says with that practice, he's like, don't bother if you can only do it once. Like, it's just going to be a weird hour. But do it every single day for 60 minutes for, I think, 60 or 90 days. And that discipline will change your life. Because you will, process all of this, like, cruft and sort of mental debt that has accrued over the last sort of years of your life. And now I think he calls it like mental inbox zero. And so now he's like, I can just sit, and there's no issues, there's no problems, there's no complaints, there's no grievances, there's no, so I can just sit there and kind of like appreciate, I don't know what it's like in his head, like in that hour, but he describes it as sort of blissful. It's like, I don't know if it's a constant state of appreciation. I don't know if if it's just nothing. I don't know if it's concentrating on, some tiny breeze and just appreciating the smallest thing that he can find. I don't know. I haven't been through that road. I don't know what the end of that journey has looked like. I also imagine that's quite personal, but, that is how he has described what he's gotten out of it. And I mean, I think to your point, putting it through that sort of, filter of, like, the opportunity cost of his time is incredibly high, right? Like, he has to really want to do that, and find that to be an incredibly valuable thing. But it's also an interesting, I wonder, so through that lens, I wonder to what extent it's kind of an illustration of taking that hour and sacrificing it is almost a symbol of the uncorrelate nature of, like, time and returns, right? If there was that deeply linear relationship between effort and outcome, that hour becomes really, really important. If it's actually like, the more I meditate, the wealthier I become, then sacrificing that hour and using it as a periodic sort of constraint and reminder and demonstration of the fact that, like, I could work 1 minute a year and have 90% of the same outcome that I would if I worked 90 hours a week, is a really interesting thing. And I think we find when we place massive constraints on ourselves, that we can a lot of times drive the same outcomes in a lot less time. We just have this sort of script in our heads about what we think needs to go into the work, or we try to earn it more and demonstrate how hard we're working so that we are perceived to have earned it and deserve it, which is a very sort of Benjamin Franklin, Charlie Munger idea, which I resonate with, but is another sort of source of, an unresolved paradox in my head. Like, I think both of those things are important and true, and I don't know how to untangle them from each other yet, but maybe I'll figure it out.
I think in our view, your book on Naval has every chance of standing the test of time and becoming a classic. We read in the beginning of the book, you write that concepts and interpretations change over time, medium, and context, which is maybe sort of a disclaimer, or how would you explain that?
It's both a little bit of a disclaimer and a little bit of a truism, I think, right? It's hard to not read these books. You read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and you're kind of like, I wonder how much of the original intent is what's being received by me 2,000 years later. Like, right? I don't know. So it's a little bit of a disclaimer, but I think it's also just a very helpful thing to remember. And I mean, like, by definition, everything in this book I took out of context. So it is very, I didn't want Naval to be like catching heat in 10 years for something that he said in here, that I took out of context or changed. And I don't want people to, over-index on something that is misinterpreted, I suppose. I just feel a lot of responsibility for creating a book, knowing how much of myself was shaped by books in turn, that I'm like, oh, I want people to appreciate this may not be the original intent, and to, like, you use judgment as you let these ideas enter your head, and truly to remember that context is very important, and the inflection of different words can totally change meaning. And so when I take a transcript and turn it into a book and then put it next to a transcript from a few years later, that can totally change the meaning of something. And it's very possible that I have misinterpreted something, an intent that Naval had. It's something I was very conscious of as I tried to create this.
What do you think people reading your book 100 years from now will think?
I don't know. It's an interesting question. God, I hope they're reading it 100 years from now. In some ways, like, some of these are timeless human problems, right? Like, people have been trying to figure out how to be happier, like, forever. I hope that I think that the wealth section will be out of date sooner than the happiness section, just due to fundamental human nature. Hopefully, we're living in a state of incredible abundance. But also, as Buffett said, which I think is one of the scariest and truest things ever, like, it's not greed that drives the world, but envy. I think we could have a lot of abundance and still have plenty of unhappiness. Arguably, like, that's the state that many of us live in now. And I wonder what'll happen. I wonder how much the attention and energy of humanity will sort of shift towards deliberate work on happiness in 100 years, as that maybe becomes a little more obvious, right? Like, maybe it will become clear to us that, like, our subjective experience is controllable. Our subjective experience is at the end of the day really most of what matters to how we live our lives internally. And it's interesting to see, I can imagine that being an incredible whole field in the future, right? Like, I remember, like, I was very, like, snarkily saying something about how, like, at the current rate of, like, at which people are becoming life coaches, like, by 2060 everyone will be a life coach, and somebody else is like, would that be so bad? And I was like, oh, like, I guess not. Like, that we could all probably use a little bit of external sort of interest in our own subjective experience. And maybe we're transitioning from this sort of, like, stoic sort of pioneer mindset to this, like, no, it matters. Like, it matters a lot. And maybe it matters the most, sort of increasingly, like, as we're safe and fed and watered and cared for, and, sort of abject poverty is decreasing rapidly and sort of continues to. And, if we have a second sort of industrial revolution, that'll get become way more true, way more quickly. But we are still living in these sort of like, outdated meat things that are with brains and emotions and reactions designed for hunting and gathering and living outside. And it's going to become really hard and important to control that, and learn to manage it. So maybe that'll be, one brick in the monument that becomes sort of a big focus on, mental awareness and discipline and health and training.
To put you on the spot a bit there, what is the single most important idea or principle you have gained from Naval?
It depends on the day, and what I'm trying to do. I would say that the idea of leverage has totally changed my life and how I think about my work, and it hit me at just the right time. It's changed a lot about my working life. I mean, I knew I had installed in me before that the idea that happiness was a choice and that the perspective was there. I think probably the relationship between desire and the just reflecting on how easy it is to create new desires. You can scroll Instagram for 1 minute and leave it with 20 new desires. It's a desire machine. Like almost all of social media is, but to me, like Instagram is uniquely. But that's so much of what we do. Our recreation is now like basically desire creation. Like we just look around for shit to want. And it's a pernicious sort of effect on happiness now that I understand the relationship more deeply between desire and unhappiness. So that's probably the most important sort of from the mental awareness perspective.
And on your own social media, at least on Twitter, you say that right now, at least your byline is unemployed yet busy, so, which is a great quote. So how are you allocating your time right now?
Well, I try to go to the gym every day. So health first, like we're talking about. I do a lot of learning and reading. I'm reading a lot about, have been reading a lot about crypto for the last year and just trying to catch up on sort of the technological innovations that are happening. I started my own podcast that I'm having a ton of fun with, and writing more and just like processing ideas. So, reading and working through those things, and just creating and bringing people together. Right? I created a course on leverage. That was sort of the last year. I'm working on my next book now. I'm starting a small venture fund, to sort of invest in increasing sort of technologies here and, hopefully accelerate some of the things we've been talking about and bring some new startups into the world. That's sort of the gamut on the work side. There's plenty going on in the personal life, like getting married next year, and there's a lot to do.
Congratulations!
Thank you. That's been sort of the work now, and it's sort of forming itself into a new thing. But I really just sort of let myself off the leash and just like follow my own curiosity for a while, which has led to some really chaotic collection of topics on my blog that I'm trying to narrow back down and get into a little bit of a focus again. But it's been really fun to explore. Do
you schedule unproductive time, like recover time?
I try to just not schedule anything, which is going pretty well. And then I just sort of follow the energy. Like I default to working, but I'm getting better at realizing sort of when the marginal rate of productivity goes down, or when I'm just like not enjoying it anymore, then I just like stop and go to the gym or go to the sauna or go for a walk or whatever. I definitely like err on the side of overworking myself rather than underworking. So I try to like move that pendulum and just create like slightly different habits around it, and, appreciate the fact that I can do that now. But yeah, it is much easier it is easier to see the decrease in marginal productivity, but harder to accept it when you're just like sort of working on your own. But I also find sometimes like a change is as good as a rest, and there's enough different things to be working on and excited about that just sort of shift attention and start doing something else.
Something Naval really shares with Charlie Munger and Peter Bevelin and those is that of having a basic understanding of general topics such as microeconomics, game theory, psychology, and then to build specific knowledge and be on the really, cutting edge in a certain area. How do you split your time between like getting the basics and going into the more detail?
Oh yeah, it's an interesting question. I default to being much more of a generalist, I think, than a specialist. I agree with the importance of it. I definitely I'm trying to like go back and fill in some of my like core science stuff. Like I'm not particularly good at fundamental physics. I'm decent with economics and math, and language. I think the specialist pieces sort of like come up. I'm almost like driven by opportunity in those more. And so I kind of like in this cycle of life, kind of like, all right, step back, take a really broad view again, and then figure out where to specialize again. And so, I've done a little bit of a spike on crypto recently, over the last year or so. I feel like confident enough to invest there, but far from world class on any of this stuff. I mean, it's happening so quickly that a lot of people, there are a lot of people who have been in it a lot longer and learned a lot more, but I've sort of satiated the at least for now, like the depth as a generalist. I would really like to do a similar sort of spike in both nuclear and nanotechnology as a result of a book that I just read that I kind of like have my eye on becoming deeper in those, and have given a lot of thought actually about how to kind of like reinforce the generalist piece. And there's some cool, like, I would like to do like the online great books program and like go back through some of the great reads of the Western world. I've thought about sort of doing like some of the people I read and admire have gone back and done like open courseware stuff on physics or engineering or something like that. Those are values that I hold that would be really fun to kind of go back and do, and it might be really helpful for some of the upcoming specialty studies that I want to do. But I think investing is a good, especially tech investing, is a great forcing function for that. My natural tendency would be like slowly layer as a generalist, but if I'm like, oh shit, like we gotta invest in some of this, I gotta get like, I gotta go deep on this quickly if I'm going to feel confident sort of allocating capital. And that's a really that is part of the good feedback loop, right? Like I want to know what I know, and I want to be driven to learn more by the fact that I have to put chips on the table. And that's the interesting part about investing to me, is it's not, if investor is my only legacy, like it's something Naval and Buffett have said the same thing. Like if investing is my only legacy, like I will have failed. But I think it's a great way to test your beliefs and your current understanding of the world and see what you know.
Maybe this is a bit of a difficult question, but when do you know when you know enough to invest, for example? Buffett speaks about having a circle of competence, and it's quite hard to define, I think.
Yeah, it is quite hard to define, and I think it is increasingly hard. It is harder the more you try to add, but the threshold changes, I think, depending on the scale of the investment and who you're investing with, and what your thesis is, right? It does not take nearly as much conviction to say, and your timing matters too, right? So like use the case study of the internet. Like it would have taken a lot of conviction, to say like the internet's going to change the world in 1974. It did not take nearly as much in 2005, but it was still actually not that obvious in 1996, for example. And so what is the depth of your thesis, right? Like, are you saying the internet's going to change the world and I want to expose myself to that phenomenon? That takes like a reasonable amount of conviction, but not super, super deep specificity about how, like which particular parties are going to change the world. If you say like which of these companies are going to survive for 20 years, that's a very difficult question. If you say which of these companies are going to be the best source of returns for the next 20 years, that's an even harder question, right? So I guess ask yourself like what thresholds you're trying to meet for each of these, and then sort of like scale it appropriately. new questions emerge as you go down the rabbit hole, of course. But and then the opportunity cost of that incremental study time, like what are you giving up the building of an entirely new circle of competence to continue to expand this one? And what's the sort of ROI on that? And also what you're interested in, right? Like, when you find yourself like, I will probably stop short of like the individual structure of lab experiments in like nuclear power. But like somewhere between that and like, hey, how close are we? And like, is this going to happen? And what are the implications of it happening? And, who are the smartest people in the world on it? And where do I continue to read on it? And, so that's all. It's a constantly shifting thing. It's a very good question. That's probably like half intuitive and half sort of game theory, almost. Really, it's almost like a portfolio. You're building a portfolio of knowledge in the same way that you're building a portfolio of stocks, and you kind of like look around allocate your scarce resources.
So coming back to the book a bit, you've written one about Naval now. It's the first almanac. Can we expect more almanacs, or what is the point here?
What is the point? I don't know. The point, I did this opportunity just sort of like poof arrived out of nowhere. Like I did not see it coming. I did not particularly engineer it. And I didn't know that it was going to be a book when I started the project. And I didn't even really know that it was going to be called an almanac. It just kind of felt right. And that all sort of emerged. Having now been through the process, I'm like, oh God, I wish this book existed for other people, or there are other people who I wish to study in this to the same extent that I've studied Naval. And it turns out that, reading everything they've ever written and then doing a gigantic book-sized jigsaw puzzle of every concept they've ever said is a really good way to learn what those people have to offer and sort of internalize that. So I am working on a second book that is also an almanac for, and I don't think I've said this publicly before, but the website is up, so I think I can now. Balaji Srinivasan, he is was the CTO of Coinbase. He's a founder of a number of companies, investor in a bunch more. He's like a futurist. He's a bit more sort of a technical, sort of like math oriented person than Naval is. But he's got very interesting thought. He's about as he can see sort of and predict and project farther out than most people I've ever read before. So I'm learning a ton and sort of thinking about a lot more about like the nature of truth and the impacts of technology and, but also a founder, also an investor, also immensely sort of practical day-to-day person. And I don't know. We're chipping away at it day by day, and I'm loving the process again and having a lot of fun with it. So, that's the next big project that'll come out.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and really look forward to read it. And about reading, we know you love to read, and we've touched upon several books so far. Do you have any other books that you feel are really must reads?
I mean, so I have one that is like fresh and exciting. This is the first book in like a few years that has like really changed my perspective and might change the trajectory of my life. I absolutely dearly love this book. It's called Where is My Flying Car by J. Storrs Hall. And this guy is a brilliant sort of engineer and researcher, scientist. He's worked all over the place. He's worked in a ton of different fields. The sort of premise is examining like why we don't have flying cars. When that seemed like so inevitable sort of in like the 40s and 50s. But this book is probably only half about flying cars, like maybe not even. But it examines like all of the fundamental technologies that exist, but haven't been pushed forward or haven't been well distributed or haven't been expanded upon, in particular, nuclear energy and nanotechnology. He's like, if we had been advancing nuclear energy and nanotechnology at the same rate that we have been advancing basically internet and software, we would basically be in the midst of a second industrial revolution where like energy would become absolutely too cheap to meter. And energy is actually a much better sort of predictor of lifting people out of poverty than money, right? Like energy begets much more of that. And on a nanotech side, it is basically true, like, well-engineered nanotechnology is the ability to create almost any imaginable material at any scale, like from an atomic level on up. And so with those two things, we could all of a sudden do all this crazy shit, like build a 100-kilometer tall and 300-kilometer long structure out of diamond that lets us send stuff into orbit for like pennies per pound, and build like flying cities and build floating islands and build colonies anywhere, and anybody can have a flying car. Like, the combination of these two things is like an utterly unimaginably abundant and incredible future. And both of these things exist, like, or are within reach, or are sort of possible in our lifetimes, given like enough energy and effort and resources. And it makes me both incredibly impatient with the previous generation for not pushing on these things and doing the work to get us there, but also really optimistic about the future. I got a long rant on this book. I love it so much. I want everyone in the world to read it. I want every investor to read it. I want every student to read it, so that we have like just piles and piles more scientists and engineers and investors investing in these technologies. And it's just both annoying and incredibly inspiring. And it paints a beautiful, very exciting sort of set of possibilities for the future. And you learn a ton of cool like math and science and physics along the way, mind-blowing facts in like every few pages. I'll stop now because I can see you guys just laughing at how hilariously unnecessary this rant is. But I have never wanted people to read a book more in my life.
No, it's really interesting.
This guy's a genius. Like, this guy is so brilliant, and he worked very hard on this book. He became a pilot in order to kind of study this, and you learn about the, like, I don't know. It's incredibly well researched and well written, and it's brilliant thinking and inspiring writing. And I won't say it's the easiest read in the world. Like, it is technical. It's written like a little bit by an engineer. It's not a textbook, but like stick with it, and it will change your perception of reality and hopefully like the trajectory of the human race.
Is there any book you would like to exist but you don't want to write it?
Oh, I would really like to read a book about the sort of like the marriages and family lives of irregular, highly successful, highly powerful people through like history and today. There's a lot of stuff that's like in biographies that it's just very difficult to read like 1,000 biographies, but I would want to read like a cross section of the like 20 or 30 most interesting sort of aspects of sort of unique people. So I think that would be a really interesting, like family lives of incredible people, both to see sort of what some of them sacrificed, but also to hopefully see counterexamples of like what does not have to be sacrificed in order to achieve, some truly incredible high impact things. I would expect it and hope to see people sort of on both sides of that.
Both what to do and what to avoid, I guess.
Yeah, like I think I don't want to believe that you can't have like a helpful healthy relationships with your kids and be a great entrepreneur. But I'm sure that some people have given that up in order to accomplish their goals, and I definitely want to see both sides of that argument, and hopefully more evidence on one than the other. But if they did it, how they did it.
So thank you, Eric, for a very thoughtful conversation about you and the book. And I just want to end with the book is open for free. Actually, you can read it for free. But I would say to our audience that it's better to buy the physical copy or the Kindle version.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Actually, yeah, it's all the book stuff is on navalmanack.com, and all the digital versions are available for free. So whether you are strapped or just curious or want to try it out or whatever. That was a request of Naval's to make the digital versions available for free. Very happy to do it. We've had millions of people read the free version. This thing's getting translated into like 20 languages. And I'm really excited and grateful that it's sort of reaching people all over the world and in various languages. I think anyone on earth can get something valuable out of this book. And I hope that I hope it helps in some way, right?
My copy is insanely highlighted, so
that's the goal.
Where can our audience follow you?
My personal website is ejorgenson.com. I send some sort of email every week with like a podcast or a new post or something, where I just kind of explore ideas. I'm on Twitter all the time at Eric Jorgenson. And if you're either of those two places, you'll get info about my old book, my new book, whatever else is coming. But get prepared for some random tangents. There'll probably be some fission, maybe some nanotech. I don't know. We'll see.
Do you have something more you want to add before we finish up?
I don't know. I appreciate you guys having me on so much. I love conversations like this.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Investing by the Books, a podcast by Redeye. Follow us on Twitter at ib_Redeye and email us at ib.podcast@redeye.se. To improve, we'd love to hear your feedback, so please rate and review us. Notice that the content in this podcast is not and shall not be construed as investment advice. This information is meant to be informative and for general purposes only. For full disclaimer, visit redeye.se. I'm your host, Eddie Palmian, and until next time, I sincerely wish you the best of luck on your journey through life and investing.